Just a quick note before we begin. If you find meaning or comfort in these conversations, consider becoming a supporter of the Don't Forget to Breathe podcast. Your support helps keep these stories alive and makes it possible for others to find hope in their own grief journey. For as little as $3 a month, your support goes to offset costs associated with production. You can learn more on the information page for this episode and by clicking on the link, Support the Show. Welcome to Don't Forget to Breathe. I'm Bruce Barker, here with my co-host, Kristin Glenn. Today, we're honored to be joined by someone whose life has been shaped by both storytelling and loss. John DeDakis spent more than 2 decades as a journalist with CNN, helping bring stories from around the world into people's homes. He's an award-winning novelist, writing coach, manuscript editor, speaker, certified grief educator, and someone who has dedicated much of his life to helping others find the courage to tell their own stories. John is the author of 6 mystery suspense thriller novels, the Lark Chadwick Mystery Series. A former White House correspondent, John regularly leads writing workshops at literacy centers and writers' conferences. He is also the host of a video podcast, One-to-One with John DeDakis, on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. But like many of us listening today, John's most important story isn't one he covered as a journalist. It's the story of his son and the grief journey that followed his death. Today, we're not here to interview an author or a journalist. We're here to sit down with a fellow father, a fellow bereaved parent, and have an honest conversation about love, loss, storytelling, meaning, and what happens when life changes forever. John, welcome to Don't Forget to Breathe. We are so grateful that you're here.
Thank you, Bruce, and Kristin. It's good to be here.
We're honored. You know, John, before we talk about grief, writing, coaching, conferences, or any of the work you've done over the years, we'd love to start where every parent wants to start, and that's with our child. You know, one thing we've learned in this podcast is that children are often introduced through the lens of how they died when we really want to know how they lived. So before we go anywhere else, could you tell us about your son, Stephen?
Sure. Stephen was 22 when he died, and he was a cook at a high-end restaurant in the D.C. area. Really a multi-talented guy, had a very outgoing, effervescent personality, made friends easily, was curious about the world around him. He was very musical, taught himself how to play drums, taught himself how to play guitar, was in several bands.
Wow.
When he was a food runner at this restaurant in Bethesda, Maryland, he was very intrigued by all of the stuff that was going on in the kitchen. And so he went to the chef and he said, "Teach me how to cook." And so they mentored him, and so he became. He wasn't going to become a chef. It's a very high powered, confusing, hot situation, but and you really need to have a great memory under the gun to be able to handle all the orders that come flying in, and so he basically learned how to be a cook. He was funny. He had an uncanny ability to be able to mimic any accent,
I love that.
and then just make stuff up in that accent. And he was hilarious. And so it's easy for me to continue to always think of him. And when I do, I laugh, I smile.
That's
He
awesome.
was just an engaging person. And
That is so good to hear. I love
I'll
that.
say one more thing, because after he died, and I don't know, I don't talk about this a whole lot, so we'll see how this goes.
Okay.
But obviously we had his cell phone, and we were able to tap into it, and there were a lot of texts that he had with his friends, and he it was clear to me, and this was confirmed by the texts and the conversations that I had with some of his female friends after he died, that he treated women with respect. He was, guys, especially at that age, or at least maybe I'm projecting my own, youthfulness into the picture here. But, when I was his age, women were sexual conquests. He wasn't like that. I mean, he was a normal guy, but he cultivated friendship. And women would tell me he treated me like a gentleman. And that's, I think, lost these days. But it was gratifying to know that he was taking a lot of the lessons that Cindy and I were trying to teach him about women. Because, I mean, I write as a woman, and I know how difficult it is to be a woman. I mean, a lot of what it means to be a woman is playing defense. And, Stephen was not the kind of guy that would put a woman on the defensive and make her feel unsafe.
That's beautiful to hear. And I echo what you said. I was the same way. And I think, and my friends, and I mean, remembering back of that far, it was certainly not how I grew into being a gentleman and being more mature and how to treat women. And that's a beautiful thing to hear about Stephen at that age. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I love that.
Yeah, so, as a woman, we need more men like that in the world.
Yeah.
Yay, Stephen. And yay, both of you, as you've evolved.
Thank you.
So, John, what parts of Stephen are still present in your life today?
His humor. There was a certain peacefulness that he had. I sense his presence. It's hard to put into words a lot of those things, because Cindy and I will still repeat words and phrases that he would use that were uniquely him. And so a lot of him is just embedded in us, in our psyches, I think.
Yeah. I can hear my daughter, Kristin. I know we have Kristin's on here, but my daughter, Kristin, I can hear her voice in my head saying little things like that. Like, I can say this, and it won't mean anything to you guys, but I hear it in her voice where it's like, "Oh, Daddy," and I can hear it.
Right.
and I find myself in situations where I that's what she would say, and then I hear that voice, and it used to be troubling, but now it's comforting.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yep.
So I know that my relationship with her has changed over the years since she died. Has your relationship with Stephen changed over the years since his death?
Never really thought about that. I think we tend to romanticize the situation. We try not to remember the hard parts.
Yeah.
And so what we're left with are the good memories, or at least I think that is a saving grace. Not everyone has that luxury, I guess, but it's hard to think of it in terms of a relationship, because here's one possible relationship, and that is that he would be 36 now, and I find that every now and then I have a really good conversation with someone who's 36, and it's not something I seek out, but I look back on it and I go, "Oh man, that was interesting." And it's also a relationship or a conversation that I'm having with someone who is in recovery from some sort of addiction. And that's a conversation I never was able to have with Stephen, because he died before he was able to really get help. We had a heart-to-heart about his heroin addiction, and I know he was working on getting clean, but he hadn't really gotten through that yet. And so it always means a lot to me when I'm able to have a conversation with someone who has faced their demons and done the work to get beyond it. and then be in, and then be in a position to help other people, because I think he would have been that person. So I suppose if I could answer that question, it would be probably the way that relationship goes on is when I have those conversations with people who are in recovery, often people who are the age he would be now.
Wow.
Wow.
That's powerful.
That's almost spooky, I think.
Yeah, it's synchronicity or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bruce and I often talk about what we imagine grief and even the loss of a child to be before it became our reality. And then certainly when our own grief arrived, it was nothing like we imagined. As you look back on your own journey, what stands out for you now that you, in hindsight, thought would be different than how you actually have gone through the grief surrounding your son's loss?
I'd had grief experiences before, and because I was a reporter for so long, that the professionalism that goes into being a reporter is that you compartmentalize. You have to put your emotions aside in order to do the job because you're not the story. And so I think that some of that discipline, that emotional discipline, helped a little bit, but it can also be an impediment because then you don't really allow yourself to go there, and you can, become so detached that it's not real. Well, when, your kid dies, that's hard to put aside. And I think that probably the thing that happened that was the breakthrough was being able to cry and to be able to cry unashamedly. I think that, and I don't want to make a generalization, I think women get it. Crying is an emotional safety valve, and that's something that's easier, I think, for many women than it is for guys. We tend to hold it in, and we tend to be strong and all that kind of stuff, which is it's a load of shit, quite frankly, because you're not really dealing with it. It's just becoming, internalized and it's corrosive and it festers to the point where, if you think about it, most of the mass shooters are guys. And my hunch is that what ends up happening in those extreme cases is that the grief and loss and pain and tears become bullets. And, the grief isn't resolved. It's just manifesting itself in a really twisted way. And so the breakthrough was being able to emote and to allow myself to move toward the pain and feel it, sit with it, be with it, and allow it to sit with it. And, there comes a point where you're able to go to the next step and the next, and then re-enter society as a different person, a changed person. The grief never goes away completely, but, I'm redefined by what has happened in a way that allows me, I think, to be more empathetic, to other people who are having the same experience.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you stated it so well. It doesn't go away. It's not something that, as maybe we thought before we went through our own journeys, there was closure or any of those words.
That's not a good word. Yeah.
Not a good word. Bruce and I have even had conversations about the word healed. And, my stance on that is that's an action verb. I am healing, but I'm not going to say healed. I'm not. So I think you said that so well, of like that sense of carrying it. What was it like for you to discover that you are going to carry this with you? This is part of the John now that exists on this planet.
I think that the acceptance of that came with the experience of it. Because for the longest time, months and months, life was a blur and a blah. It just wasn't fun. And I was just kind of trudging through the days.
Right.
And I agree, time doesn't heal, but what we bring to it, the work we do, helps to heal. And I like what you're saying. It's an ongoing, it's a healing. I'm certainly different now. And I guess that it's just recognizing that I'm able to be, I hate to use the word normal, but I mean, I do feel normal again. There, as you both know, for the longest time, it's like, how can people laugh? How can people even enjoy life when, life has stopped? And I guess it's that moment where you realize that, well, there are things that are funny and that it's okay to laugh, and that's not a betrayal. It's just that life does go on.
Absolutely.
And being able to continue to move forward. I don't like the word move on.
Right.
Me
I
neither.
move forward. I'm a different person, but I'm moving forward and making meaning out of this thing, finding meaning and purpose in life now that things have changed.
Kessler would be so proud of you.
Well, yeah, I've got his book right here, Finding
You're,
Meaning, the
you're saying
sixth
all the
stage of
things.
grief. Yeah.
Absolutely. He'd be so proud that you're part of his team.
Speaking of that, many grieving parents wrestle with that tension that
Sure.
few outside understand. And we desperately miss our children. Yet life continues, and it continues to bring us moments of beauty. Sometimes those moments feel welcome, and sometimes it's confusing, and sometimes even guilt. And Kristen and I have talked about this as a subject of a previous episode, where parents ask themselves whether they're allowed to laugh again or dream again or fully even engage in life again. Can you tell us more about that? What part of that journey is the same for you? And do you still hold sorrow and gratitude? Can you do that, hold that at the same time?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. There's a lot in that question. There's something that's interesting. I just wrote a memoir that's going to be coming out at the end of the summer of 2026. And in writing it, and it took me several years to write, and I went back and looked at my journals when I was doing it. And one of the things I discovered is that in fact, I think I have it here. Yes, I do. My wife and I, when Emily was visiting us right in the days right after Stephen died, and we were cleaning out Stephen's room, which was excavating is probably a better word. And I came across a notebook that had blooper newspaper headlines.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading this to Cindy, and she's laughing hysterically. And Emily took a couple of pictures, and I'm actually using one in my memoir. But just to give you an example, these are real headlines in newspapers. County to pay $250,000 to advertise lack of funds. Or, let's see. One-armed man applauds the kindness of strangers. Legislator wants tougher death penalty. I mean, you have to think. You have to think a minute about these. Panda mating fails. Veterinarian takes over. You get the idea.
Yeah.
And Cindy's just howling. And Stephen died just a few days earlier. And I think it's important to be able to find humor and irony in life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I'll stop there. Is there any? Maybe I'm not answering your question?
No, you're absolutely answering the question.
And I mean, and here's the thing: Stephen had a tremendous sense of humor. He would have loved those. And I mean, why do we want to be? Why do we feel that it's honoring them to be, dour when they weren't?
Then that's the legacy, is that our lives have become dismal, and that feels like a double sadness to me.
Yeah.
Like a new layer of tragedy, when now the ripple effect of other lives becoming incredibly sad forever. Certainly there's an ongoing sorrow, just like Bruce said, a combination of joy and sorrow, but to be able to laugh and, to laugh with other bereaved parents has a new depth for me.
Yeah.
They're my favorite humans. And I don't think going through this tragedy all of a sudden makes us great people. We just become more of who we are. Like there's some real jerks that are bereaved parents. So, I mean,
I think I can put my finger on what you're talking about. And that is that we in our, human beings are masters of superficiality. We can get through life with, hi, how are you? How about them Braves? And, hot enough for you. We can skip across the surface. Once you've really dealt with mortality, your own, your kids, there's a depth there. There's a capacity for depth there. And I consider it a good day if I've had at least one in-depth existential conversation with someone about stuff that really matters. And it's the bereaved who have been dealing with those kinds of things. And so those are the conversations that are meaningful and resonant because they're talking about real stuff, not cliches.
Wow.
Definitely.
That is so beautifully said. I'm going to re-listen to that part of what you just said, I think several times, because I think that capacity, the capacity for depth that you just mentioned is what makes this work that we do so darn meaningful. And, you can drop into such a conversation with someone that's in this quote club that none of us would ever have imagined or signed up for, but that, gosh, here we are. And to go to that, I'm so looking forward to going to the Compassionate Friends Conference coming up, because I just feel like in a brief period of time, I know from past experiences how deep and meaningful conversations can be with my fellow bereaved. So for you to put it in those words, it really captures what I think about this community of our shared community often.
Right.
It does. They do feel different. Would you say?
This is one thing I'm a little nervous about. I'm going to be leading a writing workshop on using writing as a way to heal at the upcoming Compassionate Friends Convention in Baltimore in July. And this is the first time I will have been at a conference for the bereaved. And even though it's been, 15, 16 years since Stevens died, one of the concerns I've got, and I'll be interested in your perspective on this, is that, am I going to be, put back in the undertow of grief? I'm going to be surrounded by sad people,
Wow.
So, is this going to be a downer?
I have not found that to be true.
Okay.
When I have been in those settings, I have found it to be the opposite, to look around the room and just think, this is what human resiliency looks like. This is, this sense of shared humanity and compassion and not a bunch of BS. I leave hopeful. I leave wanting to live very fully. Certainly some moments of lots and lots of shared tears during those moments that also is very cathartic.
Yes.
So let's chat in August and see.
Okay, fair enough.
I would love to revisit that. Let's do that, because all three of us will be going to a conference. So wouldn't that be interesting to reconvene in August and say, what was that like for you? To sit with the bereaved. That'd be an interesting topic. In my opinion.
Absolutely. Because I think a lot of people resist, going to something like this because of the emotional intensity. And so, it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Sure. My own husband the other day said, your mom likes to have a good time. She's going to a grief conference in July. Jokingly to our surviving kids. And I was like, well, to each their own.
Here's the thing I like about conferences like this, or being in gatherings of other bereaved parents, is, and Kristin and I have talked about this just in a recent episode, about this mask that we put on for other people. And the thing about being in a group like this, and I think you may find, and again, we'll revisit in August, is the level of authenticity that's there. There's no masks. Everybody's just being themselves, and
what is
safe
the mask?
for joy.
What is the mask you're referring to? How would you describe it?
When someone's asking, so how are you? Like, I'm good. And you put it on and you're going through whatever. Mm-hmm. And if someone asks that at a conference like this, it's like, how are you doing? This morning was tough, but you know what? I'm feeling okay right now. And be able to have that. And and you get it. Everybody gets what's going on. So there's that, you're speaking the same language. Like if you're in a room full of journalists, you are talking a certain language.
Sure.
You know, like the insider term you shared with us earlier, like, but you guys know that because that's what you've done, and you're very comfortable. There's no filter. You're just who you are. And I think that being around other bereaved parents, and especially when I do, dad's groups and retreats, there's no filter. There's no mask. Like we just are where we are. And I believe Kristin can speak to that as well with the moms retreats and couples retreats. You can just be real, and there's laughter there also. So you're not walking in and your entry fee is a case of tissue. No, you're just going in.
It's good line. That's a good point.
John, most of us, we spend our lives learning through our own experiences. What's unique about your story is that you've spent much of your career listening to the experiences of others. And as a journalist, author, and storyteller, you've heard thousands of stories. Then grief became part of your own story. I'm curious how that changed the way you see people, the way you listen to people, and the way you write and even tell stories, particularly in your Lark Chadwick mystery series.
Again, there's a lot there to unpack, but the thing that jumped out is that I'm a voraciously and relentlessly curious person, which is a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that I've got the courage to go deep with someone, and when I do that, I find that people blossom in many ways, and more often than not, by the end of the conversation, the person has said, "I've never told that to anybody before," and that's a gift, and that means a lot. One of the things I'm learning, however, and especially through David Kessler's grief educator class, is that there's a fine line between being curious and being a voyeur, and that there's a lot of power in silence. And I teach a class in how to interview people, and his comments about silence resonated because that's actually one of the techniques I teach. And that is, a typical interview is question, answer, question, answer. But what I've discovered, and I've sort of learned this over the years, is that sometimes the way you get the best stuff is question, answer, and then you leave the mic out there. And that 2 seconds of dead air is enough to have the person add a little bit more that's a little more in depth. I've got a detective friend who told me that he uses the same technique in interrogations. And, question, answer, and then silence. And he said, often the suspect will say one more thing to fill the silence. It doesn't necessarily crack the case, but it moves the investigation forward. And so I'm finding that often I can be my own worst enemy in a conversation if I'm relentlessly asking questions instead of just shutting up and and being comfortable with the silence and seeing where that goes.
Well,
it's so true. We find that, in support groups, so often, done support groups for, about the last 30 years. And there's a lot of power in that. And I had to also, the first time I really ventured to allowing the silence, I had to, in my mind, be thinking 1001, 1002.
Yeah, right.
Don't step in.
And I'm thinking to myself, shut up. And I mean, my wife is an introvert, and so she's been a great teacher for me because I only get about 3 questions with her, and then she goes, and that's all I want to say about that.
We'll be ending that topic right now, John. Huh?
Right.
That's funny.
John, you spent so much of your life helping people tell stories, and now you do this as a workshop leader in coaching people to write to heal. Why do you think writing or telling our stories helps us heal, or does it serve a different purpose?
I think I'm still learning what it teaches us, but some of the things that I've discovered is that I've discovered the better you know yourself, the better your writing will be, because you'll be coming from a place of authenticity. Writing is often asking yourself questions. The novelist is asking, what if this kid grew up and wanted to find out more about her past? That's, one of the fundamental questions that's being asked and answered in my first novel, Fast Track. When you're asking questions and answering them from a deep place, you're getting inner clarity. You're learning more about yourself. And at the same time, you're learning how to communicate that succinctly and clearly. And so I think that we are fundamentally social beings. We communicate with each other, and we share information. We learn information. And writing is, I think, a fundamental way of transferring that inner knowledge, transferring that information. And so there's a lot to be said for writing as a way to gain inner clarity and articulate truth.
Kristin mentioned earlier about the conferences, Compassionate Friends, and then I'll be attending and you'll be a keynote at Bereaved Parents of the USA gathering at the end of July.
In Pittsburgh, right?
In Pittsburgh, yeah. So let's slide into talking about fathers and grief. We touched slightly on it, but let's dive a little deeper. So it's a subject that's particularly important to me because so many fathers tell us they feel unseen in their grief, and that's at least when they're being open. And many of us grew up believing our role as men were to protect, provide, solve problems, stay strong. And then child loss came, and that changed everything. And it changed where there's things we just can't fix. So as a grieving father yourself, and as someone who's spoken, to countless others, what have you learned about how men experience grief?
Well, they experience it often in solitude. And it's interesting that men will say, I don't feel seen in my grief. And yet, who knows that you're grieving, unless you tell someone.
Yep.
So you're going to be invisible if you are doing your best to hide. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of it. And even men who are getting together to, and maybe grief is known, it's not really talked about. You're just doing bro things. And maybe that to a certain extent is a comfort, but I don't know if it's necessarily dealing with it. This is one where I don't know if I can give you a good enough answer because I think I'm still learning it. So ask another question.
Yeah, no, that's a real answer. That's being honest and authentic. Yeah. And we appreciate that. I know our listeners appreciate that. You recently moderated a panel discussion on exploring men, masculinity, and grief at the International Death, Grief, and Bereavement Conference at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. What are some key takeaways from those discussions that you could share with the dads that are listening today, or even the others that are in their lives that maybe could help understand this journey?
I'm still processing that. One of the things that was interesting, and I kind of pursued this with one of the panelists who, again, he's a 36-year-old grief counselor or counselor. And one of the things, and he was very open in the group in that he experienced a mass shooting. Mm-hmm. and dealt with some PTSD, dealt with it in not necessarily a healthy way. And he talked about his anger and how he, was not dealing with it well until he finally turned the corner. And one of the things, and it's interesting, one of the things he uses in his counseling, especially with guys, is humor, sarcasm, as a way to dislodge a lot of the uptightness. because again, people go into counseling with an expectation that may not be in any way connected with reality. One of the things I've discovered in conversations that I've had is that people, especially guys, resist counseling because it's this touchy-feely stuff. And, this counselor is going to tell me what to do. And that's not what effective counseling is. Usually effective counseling is helping you understand yourself. And the counselor, a good counselor, is going to ask the kinds of questions that will get you thinking. And so he uses humor. He's got, he's done stand-up comedy, improv, he's done clowning. And, but he said he finds that sarcasm, is a great way to break the ice, to help the person recognize that, this is just a regular guy. And so that was kind of interesting. There was another person on the panel. I'm not going to name names,
Sure.
But, this person is well known internationally, has been a grief expert for decades. And I asked the panelists to share, if they're comfortable, with a personal experience where they navigated their own grief. And this person, who was a keynoter, talked about an experience that he had as a young child. And I said, "And what point did you come to the point where you were able to talk about this in public?" And he said, 3 minutes ago. So we're all dealing with this kind of stuff. And I think that this was the first time that this conference has done a panel discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it has been academic lectures. And there's something that happens, in a moderated panel discussion where it's sort of like question, answer, back and forth,
Right.
where you mix it up a little bit. And I felt that kind of format really helped stir the pot a little bit.
Yeah, that is really good. And it's so good to hear. So have you seen that men are becoming more willing to talk about their grief over the years? Or, I know in this case, the gentleman you spoke of was holding that since he was 3 or since he was very young. But are you seeing that men are a little more willing lately?
Well, that presumes that I have, my finger on the pulse of all maleness.
Oh, well, sure. Yeah.
I'm hoping that men are becoming more open and willing to do that. I was just on a podcast on, grief, and it was moderated by a guy. The guy was an interview, and he said it's hell for me to get any guys to come on this podcast. It's all women. And so I would like to think that guys are being more willing to be open, but I'm enough of a realist to feel that not sure we're there yet. But I think that maybe, I don't know if there's a trend, but I think that there may be an openness, more of a willingness. And I think that will continue the more men are willing to talk about their grief. And it's possible to talk about the grief and not fall apart. We're having that conversation.
Sure.
I've been near tears a couple of times in our conversation, but it's going to happen when people see that guys can talk about it. But it means that guys have to be willing to talk about it. And that doesn't mean you have to be willing, that you have to fall apart when talking about it. But if you do, that's okay too. And there are ways, to kind of catch yourself. I talk about Stephen a lot, but it's a script.
Sure.
I'm just the facts. I'm real good with just the facts. But if I get off script, if someone asks a question that goes, and you guys have been already masters at doing that, getting me off script, and I'm on emotional glare ice. I have no idea where this is going to go. But you know what? And we haven't really talked about this, but I think that this is probably the perfect time to bring this up. And that's the fear component, because I think fear and grief go together. And that's what I'm talking about, is the fear of what's life going to be like without this person. And that's something that has been a real revelation for me, because, we spend all our time regretting the past or fearing the future. And we're no good in the moment. And I gave a talk in Denver a couple of years ago, and it was a talk on fear, facing our fears. And of course, this was at a writers' conference. So I'm not talking about grief. I'm talking about writing, because it can be terrifying to hit send when you send that query letter to the agent for the first time. And someone in the Q&A, someone says, what frightens you now? And my flip answer was questions like that. But then I turned serious because I hadn't talked about Stephen. And I told quickly the story of having lost Stephen and my sister to suicide many years ago. And I said, one of the things I've discovered about grief is that once you face the worst, everything else gets put in perspective. And so stuff that used to terrify me and frighten me, not a problem anymore, because I faced it. I faced the worst, gotten through it. The world didn't end. And now I think that there's probably, looking back now, there's more confidence that I have going forward in my life than I ever had before because of that tragedy.
This is audio only, but we can see each other on a screen. Yeah, if it were video, they could have seen my reaction to what you said, because yes, we were spot on.
How would you describe your reaction?
It's instant validation to what I have carried and what I hold. And that's part of, I think, being in this community. And there's things that I know I've heard dads say in the dads groups I facilitate, that we've heard on here, and parents that have shared their stories, that it's this, and Kristin and I've used this phrase before, it's like, you get it, you just get it. But I think part of saying you get it is validation. Yeah. Like, I'm not alone in thinking this. I'm not alone in feeling this. I'm not isolated.
Which you wouldn't realize if you weren't in conversation with someone else about this heavy issue.
Exactly. You got to participate.
Right.
And so that it goes back to where, as you were saying with the panel, where it was, instead of being in a academic setting and more of a lecture, that you're pulling that back and forth. And when you engage, you're pulling the emotion as well. And as you say, you go off script, you get into your emotion. And then when people share those intimate thoughts, be it fear, joy, anger, sadness, laughter, whatever it is, you can relate. You can, now we're as close as touching each other and on the shoulder and going, I get it. I understand that resonates with me. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity.
I was just struck by when we talk about the things we've learned and how we've been changed, and the things that have come from this that are good in our lives. It's hard to grasp that sometimes, because the worst nightmare has happened, and yet I am forever changed in ways that I appreciate in myself. Professionally, that I enjoy more than presentations and teaching, and I taught high school, and, giving space for an exchange of information is so rewarding to me now. And I love presentations and things. And, I can feel Zach's presence. I can feel him saying, of course you can do that, Mom. Like, think of what you've been through, and even other losses that have been very devastating. The loss of my dad. And, it does give that perspective. It does give that perspective. Like, I can get through this. And I'm curious on how else has grief changed John? What's important to you? What matters? How you define your success? What's it uncovered about you? What's it revealed? There's a great quote: "Grief reveals you." It's revealed about you?
I think that it has, in a sense, reinforced what I already knew. And that is that I think my core motivation in life is to be able to encourage someone. And there's nothing more powerful that can bring that out than a grief experience, than a profound loss, because that then puts you in a position of being able to empathize, which is different than sympathize. Sympathy is that intellectual, yeah, I understand that. Empathy is an emotional understanding. And so I think that it has just intensified a connection with another person to be able to realize, you don't have to scratch very deeply to find grief and loss in everyone. And it doesn't mean the loss of a loved one. It can be the loss of a pet, a job, a relationship, your innocence, your health, any number of things can bring about, a sense of loss and grief. And just recognizing that everybody's got it to one degree or another. And that, I think, is a uniting kind of experience.
Wow. Yeah, it certainly is. To have the goal of encouraging others is also a beautiful legacy, I have to tell you. It reminds me of, I'm on your third novel and enjoying them so much.
Thank you. You've just encouraged me.
Well, there you go. But I just...
I'll write another one.
I find Lark everywhere. I find her mentors everywhere. I find it to be, I love the way you have weaved in so many lessons about grief in a fictional novel, Good.
And I wasn't writing them to be pedantic. Writing them because I needed to write. And, you go toward the pain, which I did at the time without knowing that's what I was doing. And so thank you. If it resonates, you've just made my day, ma'am.
Oh, it certainly has. Sometimes to the detriment of spending time with anyone else in my life, I am.
That's okay. That's totally okay. I'll allow it.
I'll tell them I got a permission slip directly from the author today, so that seems pretty legit. Yeah. I think that I'm curious a little bit even more about that. How your journey through the loss of your sister, the loss of your son, where does it show up in your novels, your writing, your speaking at conferences or anywhere? Like, where do you see what you've lived through continue to influence you? Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I guess I can go back to the creative process because when my sister died, I didn't go through grief counseling, but someone did suggest move toward the pain. And I had no idea what that meant. But when I started writing, that's exactly what I did. And I think what happens is that what I'm doing is my protagonist is a 20-something young woman. I am neither. And so that I think makes it easier to write about grief because there's a certain degree of detachment between my protagonist and me. She's dealing with stuff I've never had to deal with, but I can imagine. And so I can take stuff that I've experienced and then, given it to her to navigate. And that makes it, there's a certain degree of emotional distance from there between us. And yet when I wrote my fourth novel, Bullet in the Chamber, that is dealing with heroin addiction. The front cover is a bullet in a syringe. And I woke up with the image when Stephen was missing because I knew it was not going to end well and I knew heroin was going to be an issue. And so I wanted to convey the powerfulness of the heroin addiction. And Bullet in the Chamber is the title of the book because I felt that if the cops could make the connection between the fatal dose and the pusher, they should charge the guy with second-degree murder because in my opinion, it's like selling a pistol with one bullet in the chamber to someone is going to play Russian roulette and you don't care. I discovered in my research, though, that it's hard for the cops to make that kind of connection. And so I guess I'm more willing now to be able to address those kinds of issues in my writing and in my teaching, I guess, just to encourage people to mind the pain as opposed to anesthetize it. We're good at numbing the pain, and I don't think that really solves anything.
It kind of waits patiently till you're willing to address it. There's a great quote that says, grief will knock on your door and then wait, and then someday knock down your door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. That's, yeah.
It's like, I'll be patient. I'll just wait right here. And, maybe grief is knocking down the door for people that become incredibly violent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's complicated.
Very complicated.
Yeah.
And random.
Yeah. John, let's shift into talking about hope. Hope can be a complicated word in grief. And for many newly bereaved parents, hope doesn't even feel possible. And it might even feel offensive. But then over time, many of us have discovered that hope doesn't mean moving on or leaving our children behind. It just means finding a way to carry both love and loss forward. After everything you've lived through, everything you've learned, and everything you've witnessed, what does hope mean to you today?
I love this question, partly because I've never answered it before. I appreciate the fact that you're willing to ask these kinds of questions. But I think that before Stephen died, I would have answered it much more superficially, probably much more religiously dogmatically. And I think now, looking back, my answer is, I do believe in hope and I do have hope, but I can say that the hope that I have is more of, it's not a long-term thing necessarily, and it's not a religious thing. I do believe that there's an afterlife, but I have no proof. I don't even know if I have much of faith even. But I do know that I can believe in hope because I've experienced it.
Yeah.
And the experience is just that I have the lived experience of knowing that the future can look bleak, and yet the dawn breaks, and I've seen some beautiful sunrises in the midst of my grief.
Yeah.
And it's a short-term hope, but it is something to look forward to because there's a lot of beauty in life, and I've experienced it while grieving. And so, maybe that's not existential, life everlasting, but it's the hope of the new day, the hope of a clean slate. That's short-term hope, but why can't that be enough? And yet, if your experience, your spirituality allows for, life everlasting kind of hope, great. That can be a marvelous way of sustaining going forward. But for me, hope has to be practical and not speculative. And so I've experienced things that make me be willing to get up the next morning.
Wow. Hope has to be practical. That is something I'm going to hold on to because I do feel that.
I just made it up.
It's so good. It's just, I think sometimes just the word hope feels just a little bit lofty and a little bit like a promise for holding on to it forever. But that it can be finding it in everyday moments, and it can be practical, and it can be in your here and now. I don't know if this resonates with both of you. My willingness to look much past the here and now has changed. I want to find things right now. My willingness to think, well, my someday, Bruce knows I'm very much like, well, when is someday happening, Bruce? Like when is, we're so new to doing the Don't Forget to Breathe, both podcast and now excitingly Foundation, that I think before going through the tragic loss of a child, I was more willing to be like, oh, well, someday people will be able to hear what we have to say. And someday we'll have lots of people that we can serve through retreats. And my thought right now is, no, I need to do this now. I want this to be impactful now. I want this to resonate with people now. So it's a hard growing of outreach just through our our little foundation that we're starting. But I think what you just said is really nice to think like hope. And do you have words of wisdom for us as we begin into this journey of outreach to others? And kind of as we close today, it's just, there's so many takeaways for, I know, both of us, but you've done so much in this world and sat with so many people and impacted so many, as Bruce and I have in different ways, but now in this new journey of this, kind of don't forget to breathe outreach.
Man.
We
I
asked
love,
you.
I love that this is. I love that this is the name of your podcast, because at the beginning of COVID, my sister-in-law sent Cindy and me a book, Eckhart Tolle. Is it? Do you know how to pronounce it? Tolle.
I think Tolle.
Yeah, well, I mean, whatever, Tolle or Toll. And the book is The Power of Now. He wrote it in 1995. It's a classic. It took me until 2020 to read it. And basically, I mean, he was suicidal and came to the realization that we spend all our time regretting the past and fearing the future, and we're ineffective in the moment. And the takeaway for me is take a breath. And take another breath, because that's the only moment that you can control is the current moment. And it's transcendent. It is when we are in touch with the divine, with, our spirituality. It is a very powerful thing, breathing. It's life-sustaining. And so we do it reflexively, but if we do it consciously, especially when we are in pain, we realize that this moment is okay, and the next moment, the next breath is okay. We have lost something very important, but we're still here, and there's a certain peace. And so as we learn to cultivate those moments, as we learn to be conscious of those breaths, there's a peace that is passing all understanding. It doesn't make sense intellectually, but it is producing those moments of hope, because we're getting through it one breath at a time. We talk about one step at a time, but it's really one breath at a time. And that, I think, is, you're really onto something when, you're willing to make that the focus, because I think that's the key to being able to get through this one breath at a time.
Can't think of a better way to kind of close our time together. It's just been an absolute honor. It really has been.
Well, it's been mutual. I mean, it's wonderful to talk with some people who understand and who ask those questions that make me think.
John, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I mean, it's truly an honor for Kristin and I to have you join our podcast. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
As we close, I keep coming back to something John said near the end of our conversation. We spend so much time regretting the past or fearing the future that we miss the moment we're standing in. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply take the next breath. John, thank you for sharing Stephen with us, and thank you for your honesty, your wisdom, and your willingness to go off script and into the places that matter most. We are grateful for your time and for the work you're doing to help others tell their stories and find meaning in their own journeys. For those of you listening, if something in today's conversation resonated with you, we encourage you to sit with it. Maybe it's the idea that grief doesn't end, but we learn to carry it. Maybe it's the reminder that joy and sorrow can coexist. Or maybe it's simply the realization that hope doesn't have to be grand or distant. Hope has to be practical. Sometimes hope is just getting through the day. And if today feels especially heavy, remember this: you do not have to figure out the rest of your life. You do not have to solve your grief. You do not have to know what comes next. Just take the next breath. John, thank you for being here. We're grateful for your voice, your heart, and your willingness to continue showing up for this community. And to all our listeners, wherever you find yourself on this journey, thank you for spending time with us. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, And don't forget to breathe. One more thing. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. We are not licensed professionals, just parents who've experienced unimaginable loss. This isn't meant to replace help from a therapist, doctor, or other mental health professional. If you're struggling, please reach out to someone qualified. You are not alone. You can also contact us by going to the show notes and click on Send Us a Text, or you can visit us at our new website, don'tforgettobreathefoundation.org. Feel free to email us at support@don'tforgettobreathefoundation.org. That's support@don'tforgettobreathefoundation.org.